Okay, we're in a new series, or not necessarily a new series, but we're in the current series. It's called I Don't Even Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And it's based off a book by Norman Geisler and Frank Turek. And they wrote this book to encourage themselves and encourage others that God is indeed our God, that our Christian faith has reasonable expectations to stand behind it. And so we've been looking at all these things. And in fact, as we go through the cycle of the messages we'll be looking at, we're going to be proving again that Christianity, or attempting to prove that Christianity is real, that Christianity is very valid. And so we'll be looking at the various elements of these messages. We'll be looking at whether the New Testament is reliable. We'll be looking if the Old Testament is reliable, that whether miracles are possible. And we began with the idea that truth exists. But today we're going to be working with, does God exist? You know, if there is no God, if there is no truth and there is no God, then our Christianity is useless and is in vain. You know, all religions, you can take all the religions of the world, you can pretty much divide them into four categories. There's atheism. Atheism means that there is no theism, there is no God. Atheism would be things like humanism and just saying that we are it. We're all that there is. For good or bad, there is no God, there is no divinity, we are it. Basically that there is no God at all. The next one that would come up is pantheism. From there we get Buddhism and Hinduism and the New Age. That God is all things. One good example of that in culture today is Star Wars. May the Force be with you. There is no divinity. It's just that God is in all things, and we need to seek Him out in the things that are around us. Then there's polytheism, many gods. And in fact, Mormonism is a good example of that, where that we believe, or they believe, I should say, that we shall all become gods. And then that leaves us with the fourth one, that is theism. Theism, the primary religions of theism would be Judaism and Christianity and Islam. That God made all things, that there is a God who loves us, there is a God who created all of these things. And we're going to be looking at theism in the weeks to come as to which one of these might be truer than the others, or might have more evidence behind it. Now there's a thing called the law of contradiction that basically means that when 3 or 4 or 5 things all have contradicting statements, that they can't all be true, right? And if you look at atheism and pantheism and polytheism and theism, the characters of God, the attributes of God, the attributes of salvation, all of these religions have different ways of reaching out and touching God. And so, but they can't all be true. So which one is the correct one? Now today we're going to be looking at does God truly exist and what evidences we have for that. We're going to look at 2 scientific theories or arguments for that, and then 1 philosophical. The 2 scientifics are this cosmological argument. Now, cosmology is not taking care of your skin and all of that. That's a different kind of word. Cosmology just deals with the cosmos, the world, the universe as we know it. And so we're looking at, in that argument, at the origin of the universe. Can we prove a God from that? The teleological argument, telos means the design. It means the origin of design, that if there is design, that there must be a designer. And lastly, those are the 2 scientific arguments. The third argument is philosophical, but one which we've grown up with all of our lives and we've expected. That's the moral argument, that if there is a moral law, then there's a moral lawgiver as well. And all of these things would suggest a theistic God. And again, a theistic God is not necessarily the Christian God. It could be. It might be something else. But at this point, we've just discovered last week that there is such a thing as true reality, that absolute truth exists. Today we're going to be looking that there is a theistic God. There's a God out there. We don't know the attributes of Him quite yet. As we go in the next few weeks, hopefully we'll try to limit that down too. But this is at least a theistic God. And again, we'll go through the cosmological argument. It's based solely on scientific law. It's based on reason and logic. This set of scientific proofs. And notice I said proof. This is not just theory. This is proof. You know, we've been accused of being the ones that are based on faith. They have reason. But in reality, we have scientific proofs behind our faith set. It comes from the Greek word again, cosmos, which means universe. And if the universe had a beginning, then the universe must have had a cause as well. And the postulate goes like this. It expresses a logical proposition. The argument says that, number 1, everything that had a beginning must have had a cause. Number 2, the universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. and that is our proposition. Premise one, though, is not just a theory. It's absolutely true. If I took a book, you know, I don't have any up here, but if we had a book with a colorful design and we looked at it, we wouldn't automatically assume it was just, it came about with the explosion in a typesetting factory or something. That did not happen. It was a designed product. We can tell the author is there. We can tell that the publisher is there, that the designer of the artwork on the book cover is there. We can see design in the book. And in the same way, we can see design in our world. This is known as the law of causality, which is the fundamental principle of science. Notice this is a law. It's not a principle or a theory. It is a law. And it basically says that everything is based on causes. We search for the causes. That's what science is all about. Without it, we wouldn't have a scientific premise. So premise one is definitely true. Without it, science itself would be a theory. But what about number two? Doctors Geisler and Turek suggest 5 lines of scientific evidence to prove that it is true. These 5 lines can be remembered by an acronym SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. The S stands for the second law of thermodynamics. Again, notice we're relying on established scientific laws. We don't have to wonder if these theories are true. These are laws that all of science accepts as a reality. And these laws of thermodynamics are such. The first law of thermodynamics is that the total amount of energy in the universe is constant. No more energy is created, no more is lost. We just have a constant flux of energy. But the second law of thermodynamics is that the universe is running out of usable energy. And if that's true, it proves that our universe had a beginning. With each passing moment, with each passing moment, the amount of usable energy in the universe continues to grow smaller, leading scientists to the obvious conclusion that one day, billions of years from now perhaps, but one day, all the energy in the universe will be gone, and the universe will suddenly go dark. So what does that have to do with God? Simply this. It means that the universe must have had a beginning. If the universe were eternal, it would have already run out of energy. And since our lights are still on, since there's still energy in the world, we know that the universe has only been in existence for a finite number of days. It wasn't eternal forever and ever. It had an existence. Therefore, it must have had a beginning. So the S of surge is the second law of thermodynamics. The U is that the universe is expanding. The expansion of the universe was discovered by Edwin Hubble. You may remember that name, Hubble. It's the same name by the space telescope. In 1927, he discovered this principle that the universe is expanding at California's Mount Wilson Observatory. Hubble discovered that no matter where he aimed his telescope in the sky, he observed a red shift in the light from every other star and galaxy. This red shift in light from the other stars is caused from their movement away from us. So why is this important about God? It's because it proves, again, that the universe must have had a beginning. Stephen Hawking, a very well-known atheist who died recently, said this: if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000, 1 part in 1,000,000, million a second after the Big Bang, then the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. So if we could take a video recording of the history of the universe and run it backwards, we would see that all matter in the universe leads back to a single point in space and in time. This single point is not the size of a star or a planet or a basketball or even a grape. It's a single point that mathematically and logically is a literal nothing. What is nothing? One theologian said, nothing is what rocks dream about at night. Nothing is literally that, nothing. And so that there must have been a point of beginning. In other words, there once was nothing, and then bang, the entire universe exploded into being. This is popularly known today as what? The Big Bang Theory. Right? Stephen Hawking again said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Alexander Vilenkin is an agnostic. Now, what's the difference between atheist and agnostic? An atheist believes there absolutely, positively, guaranteed is no God. An agnostic says, I can't prove the God, therefore I'm not believing in a God till I can see the evidences. This gentleman, Alexander Vilenkin, is an agnostic. He teaches at Tufts University, and he wrote that with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Because if there's a beginning, there's a beginner, right? Now, many Christians will say, Pastor George, we don't believe in the Big Bang Theory. We'll say, I happen to believe in the Big Bang Theory. I just happen to believe it went down the way the Bible says it went down, right? I happen to believe that the Big Bang Theory actually supports the biblical account of creation given as Genesis. As Christians, we don't believe in the naturalistic theory, called or known as the Big Bang. However, we do believe that the evidence in our universe is that it had a beginning, and that's currently and certainly supports the biblical account. And in Genesis 1:1 we read what? In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And that has true background. The R of surge is the radiation from the Big Bang. We know that the Big Bang actually happened because we can still observe the radiation that's left over from it. It was discovered by accident in 1965 by two gentlemen in Bell Labs in Holmdel, New Jersey. And they called it cosmic background radiation. Basically, it's what's left over from the afterglow of the Big Bang. If there was a Big Bang, you would expect to find it, and sure enough, they did. And those researchers won a Nobel Peace Prize in astrophysics for their discovery. Again, what does that have to do with God? It proves that the universe had a beginning, and anything that has a beginning has a cause, has a first cause. It confirms that the universe exploded into being out of nothing, applied to anything else. But the creation of our universe goes against the law of causality, and the atheist would be laughed out of the room in an instant. But in this case, they're given the opportunity to suggest that the mantle of science, there's nothing in science that supports the atheistic view, but they would suggest that is the stronghold of science, is that nothing came out of nothing. For the theist, the scientific evidence conforms to the belief that a God, whatever God it is, a God created the universe. The atheist is stuck having to believe that something as large as the entire universe came out of absolutely nothing, for no reason and for no cause. The G of surge is for galaxies. After finding the cosmic background radiation for the Big Bang, scientists turned their attention to another prediction that would confirm if there was a Big Bang, this would happen. If a Big Bang occurred, scientists believe we should see ripples in the temperature of the cosmic radiation that we talked about earlier. These temperature ripples would allow matter to congregate by gravitational attraction into stars and galaxies of stars. In 1989, NASA launched the COBE satellite, C-O-B-E, the Cosmic Background Explorer. COBE not only succeeded in finding the predicted temperature ripples, but found that the ripples were incredibly precise. See, if these variations were even 1/100,000th of a degree different in either way, then either the universe would have collapsed back into itself, or no matter what, we would never have been able to congregate galaxies and form galaxies. Again, these were actual physical observations by scientific equipment. These were not conjectures or theories or ideas. So what does this have to do with God? Simple. It means, again, the universe had a beginning, and with a beginner comes a cause. When the project leader of the COBE project, George Smoot, announced his findings in 1992, he was quoted as saying the ripples were the machining marks for the creation of the universe and the fingerprints of the Maker himself. The E of surge, S-U-R-G-E. The E is for Einstein, and for Einstein's theory of general relativity. General relativity demands an absolute beginning for time and space and matter. And more importantly, that time, space, and matter are interdependent. You cannot have one without the others. And every cause has a causer. So we know that both the premise 1 and 2 of the cosmological arguments are true. Therefore, premise 3 is also true. The universe must have had a cause, must have had a beginning. Who's familiar with the gentleman Chuck Lorre? Anybody ever heard of Chuck Lorre? He's a producer.
Yes.
And produces what?
Big Bang Theory.
Big Bang Theory. He's the producer of that. Now, if you notice, now you may not notice because it's only like a second or two long, but when the show is over and the credits are writing up, this comes up on the screen. Chuck Lorre wrote this: in no particular order, I could not or would not exist without air, food, water, gravity, tides, the moon, the sun, night, civilization, the laws of physics, the laws of thermodynamics, the law of the land, ancestors having sex, DNA, viruses, bacteria, plants, animals, oceans, ice caps, the kindness of strangers, the Big Bang, familial bonds, smart people, brave people, memory, medicine, the periodic table of elements, tribal instincts, magnetic fields, weather, Earth's molten core, a rotating Earth, a tilted Earth, tectonic plates, sleep, death, heat, consciousness, evolution, teachers, and the miraculous, self-regulating chemical factory that is my body. And he goes on, other than that, I like to think of myself as a self-made man. We are not self-made. We are created by an awesome creator. In light of the evidence, we are only left with two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, or else someone created something out of nothing. To believe that nothing created something goes against the scientific evidence and all reason and logic. That is why those of us who believe in God do not have enough faith to be an atheist. James Tour, who was a nanoscientist, said this. He said, only a rookie who knows nothing about science would say science takes away from faith. If you really study science, it will bring you closer to God. So now we're to the theological argument from the Greek word telos, which means design. And its principle goes like this. Number one, every design has a designer. The universe itself has a highly complex design. Therefore, the universe has a designer as well. William Paley is famous for creating what he calls that every watch requires a watchmaker. Let's say you found a really expensive watch sitting in the beach. There's nothing else but tons and tons of sand in this watch. If you came across this watch, you would not believe that waves suddenly brought it, all the parts, put it together, made a watch, and then left back to the ocean again. Right? That every design, anytime we see design, it must have a design maker. And so we look at that. Now the word anthropic comes from the Greek word that means human or man. So there's a principle here called the anthropic principle. It's the mounting evidence that has many scientists believing that the universe is extremely fine-tuned. Another would call it finely designed to support human life here on this earth. To quote from a nursery rhyme, perhaps, or a nursery tale, it wasn't too hard. It was just right. Right? Now, considering the weather we have in Southern California, sometimes that's true, sometimes not. But the realities are we live in an environment that could only be supporting human life because of how it was created. In fact, it's been suggested, there are 122 postulates or theories of these constants that support human life. But we're going to look at 10 of them real quick. Number one, the oxygen level. On our Earth, oxygen comprises about 21% of our atmosphere. If oxygen raised to just 25%, then fires would erupt spontaneously and destroy us all. If oxygen was just 15%, then human beings would simply suffocate. But it's at a perfect 21%. Number two, atmospheric transparency. That it's opaque. It can be seen through, but it's not totally clear. It has some sense of radiation. If less transparent, not enough solar radiation would reach the Earth's surface. But if more transparent, we would be bombarded with far too much solar radiation. The size and distance of the moon affects our gravity, it affects our tides. If greater than the tidal effects of the ocean and the atmosphere and the rotational period would be all messed up, but it's exactly where it should be if it were too severe. If it were less, orbital changes would cause climatic instabilities. We have what we have because God designed our life to be anthropomorphic, that it is supporting of human life. Number four would be carbon dioxide level. If higher, then there would be a runaway greenhouse effect would develop and we would all burn up. If there were lower amounts of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, then plants would not be able to maintain efficient photosynthesis. For those of you who may recall back to your biology days, photosynthesis is where plants take carbon dioxide and they make oxygen. And so if the plants cannot do the very process they were created to do, we would not have the oxygen that we need. And yet, it is perfectly designed for what we have. Gravity. The gravitational force were altered by 0 point and then 40 zeros and then a 1 after it. That's a large. How large a number is that? If you were to take a tape ruler, right, and go from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe, right, and put a mark that represents our gravitational force, if it were to move just an inch in any direction, we could not sustain life. We wouldn't be here if it was moved that much. So there's three suggested reasons for why it's where it is, at the exact spot it is. One is that it was physical necessity. It had to be there, but obviously nothing is forcing it to be there. It is, but nothing was forcing it there. The second would be chance. It just happened to fall coincidentally, in that right exact spot that we would need for human life. And we know that the chances of that are obviously too extreme. And the only other option is that they were designed with that in mind. The speed of light. Any of the laws of physics can be described as a function of the speed or velocity of light. It's now defined to be 299,792,458 meters per second. Even a slight variation in the speed of light would affect the other constants and preclude the possibility of life on Earth. The water vapor that's in the atmosphere, if it were greater, the temperatures would rise too high for human life. If it were less, then the Earth would be too cold to support human life. The eighth one I really like, and that's Jupiter. I'm really fond of Jupiter since researching this here. Jupiter is where? Jupiter is several planets out, but it's just in the right spot and is the right size that its gravitational attraction brings in asteroids and comets that would show up where? On our Earth, right? In fact, I believe we have a picture here of Jupiter. There it is. You know what those purple spots are there? Those are the plumes of comets that were larger than the Earth itself. And yet they landed on Jupiter, not on Earth, to destroy Earth, because Jupiter was in the way. Which I would say, thank God for Jupiter, right? If Jupiter did not exist, it was even in a different orbit, then the Earth would be bombarded with comet fragments. Now, to show you the size of things, let's go to the next picture here. Okay, there's our sun to the left, that little orange dot to the left. That's the size of our sun. Look at the stars that go on beyond that and how much larger they are. On this scale, Jupiter is a pixel. Do you know what a pixel is? In a picture, it's one of the colored dots that make up that picture. So in this scale, Jupiter is just about a pixel in size. If Jupiter is a pixel in size, Earth can't even be determined in this scale, can it? And yet that's the scale of things. Go one up there. That's Arcturus. Let's see where the scale of things for Arcturus. One more slide, please. There's our Arcturus is this orange one there right next to the star Rigel. Notice that those stars are even bigger yet, right? And in fact, that the sun on this one is 1 pixel. So Jupiter can't be defined. Earth can't even be seen in this scale as well. In fact, Betelgeuse here, yes, that Betelgeuse, exactly. But Betelgeuse here, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, then Betelgeuse is like 5 to 6 Empire State Buildings in comparison to size. God has created this immense, immense universe and galaxies and everything beyond it. We have then number 9, the 24-hour rotation of the planet. If it were longer, the temperature differences would be too great between night and day. If it were shorter, the atmosphere's wind velocities would be too great. It's just the right amount of time. Number 10, the tilt of the Earth is what? 23 degrees. If the tilt were altered slightly, then the surface temperatures would just be too extreme on our Earth. Any slight deviation in any one of these different physical factors, and I just listed 10 here. There's 122 that have been identified. Any change in those would preclude us from even existing. And so this Earth was designed for humanity in mind. These constants are interdependent. One small change in one of them would affect all of the others as well, and destroy the conditions we have for life. Astrophysicist Hugh Ross, he calculated the probability that these and other constants, there again there's 122 of them, for all of them to exist today for any planet in the universe by chance or without divine design. Assuming there are 1,022 planets in the universe, there would be one chance in 10,000 to 138. In effect, an impossibility. There's zero chance that any planet in the universe would have the life-supporting conditions that we have unless there was a divine designer in effect. Now, those who would differ may come up with other theories. You may hear this theory here that there are multiple universes, right? Multiple universes. That there's an infinite number of infinite number of universes in existence, and we just happen to be lucky enough to be in the universe with all the right conditions. First problem with that is there's no evidence for it. They don't provide scientific evidence. They just say, well, what if there's multiple, there's so many of them that we just happen to live in the right one. They're just guessing. But remember, an infinite number of things is impossible. It is an impossibility that couldn't possibly be. But even if other universes did exist. They would still need the fine-tuning to get started. So if multiple universes actually did exist, that didn't eliminate the need for a designer. In fact, it multiplies the need for a designer. So that theory is out. You know, there are 100 billion stars in our galaxy. And the average distance between these stars is 30 trillion miles. How far away is 30 trillion miles? Right? Was at least 2 tankfuls of my wife's Toyota car. I mean, it's a long distance away, right? If a space shuttle were traveling nearly 5 miles per second, and they left one star to travel to another, it would take 201,450 years to get from that star to the next. To put that in comparison as well. If we started when Jesus was born, and went at 5 miles a second, since Jesus was born over 2,000 years ago, we would be less than 1% of the way to the nearest star. But remember, there's 100 billion stars in our galaxy. And yet, according to the best estimate of astronomers, there are at least 100 billion galaxies in our known universe. So that's 100 billion stars that we can count and realize. And there's probably many, many more that we can't. How do we explain the perfect design of our universe and everything that's in it? Psalm 19:1 says this, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands." Amen? That is how we know and why there is such diversity in design in our universe. Now, on February 1st, 2003, the space shuttle Columbia disintegrated upon re-entering Earth's atmosphere, killing all 7 crew members. President Bush, on public airways, it was a national address, and everybody was tuned in, and he said this, "In the skies today we saw destruction and tragedy, yet farther than we can see there is comfort and hope." And he quoted this passage from Isaiah 40. "To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes and look at the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name because of his great power and mighty strength. Not one of them is missing." President Bush went on to say, you know, the same creator who names the stars also knows the names of the 7 souls who we mourn today. The crew of the shuttle Columbia did not return safely to Earth, yet we can pray that all are safely home. Now look at the design in humans. We saw the design in all of our macro universe. How about the micro universe? Look at the design in humans. The interaction between a dad and mom, trying to be discreet here, but when the interaction occurs, there's one cell. That one cell has over 3.5 billion letters of a software program that determines who we are and what we are. It's the same genetic information, by the way, that you have right now. That first single cell has the same genetic information that you have currently. In fact, there's only 4 things that separate you from adulthood. The same things that separated that cell from adulthood. Time, air, water, and food. That same genetic pattern is in a 2-year-old as it was in that first cell. We don't kill a 2-year-old, so that may have some kind of interaction there with abortion. But the realities are, we are an intricately designed creation. You know, we are creating 4,000 cells per second. 100,000 brain cells per second. Well, for many of us, 100,000 brain cells. Some are becoming brain cells and lung cells and heart cells and blood cells. We don't know how, we don't know why. For instance, right now, you've created 4 million new red blood cells. Right now, you created another 4 million new red blood cells. And now you've created another 4 million new red blood cells. How do you know how to do this? I mean, do we sit there and go, wait, I got another 4 million to make? It's a process that God designed already here. It must be directed by an external mind. Aristotle called this mind the unmoved mover. Jesus called it the great I am. Paul said, in him we live and move and have our being, and Jesus holds all things together. The author of Hebrews said, he sustains all things by his powerful word. We believe in a creator that not only designed it and set it in motion, but he sustains it and keeps it going. Right? That is why those of us who believe in God just do not have enough faith to be an atheist. And finally, we want to look at what the moral law says. The moral law says this. Point 1, every law has a lawgiver. there is a moral law. Therefore, there is a moral lawgiver. The Apostle Paul wrote this. He said, even if you don't have the Bible, it's written on your hearts. Everyone we know is impressed with the fundamental sense of right and wrong. And an absolute moral obligation is something that is binding on all people, all times, all places, all cultures. That is reality. That's an absolute morality. It does not describe how we actually behave, but rather it prescribes how we ought to behave. Indeed, you can't know what evil is unless you know what is good. How do you know when something's bad unless you know what's good? And because of that, we know we have a God. Unless there's an unchanging standard of good outside of ourselves. You know, if just one moral obligation exists, then the moral law exists. And if the moral law exists, then there's a moral lawgiver. How do we know the moral law exists? You don't need to plead with people to tolerate good behavior, only to tolerate bad behavior. And if you have a bad behavior you're asking for tolerance of, that bad behavior would not be known except we know what good behavior is supposed to look like, correct? Without moral law, there would be no human rights. We couldn't know justice or injustice, no way to measure moral differences. What's right for you is right for me. What was wrong for Adolf Hitler, from our perspective, was right from his, so who are we to judge? Without a moral law, there's no moral grounds for political or social disagreement. No position on any moral issue is objectively right or wrong without the moral law. But that includes even the position taken by atheists. C.S. Lewis, a great theologian and philosopher, he was once an atheist, and he said this about that time. He said, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I gotten this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? The shadows prove the sunshine. Evil doesn't disprove God. There are no rights without a creator God. So absolute morality versus relative morality. Why the confusion between them? There's confusion on several different fronts. Confusion between what is and what ought to be. What people do is subject to change, but what they ought to do is not. There's a difference. Confusion between what is and what is perceived. The perception of a moral situation is relative. Whether we believe that witches are murderers or whatever, that's a perception. But the moral values involved in the situation are not. Murder, regardless, is always wrong. It always has been and always will be. There's a confusion between an absolute command versus the relative culture. What should be done is common to all cultures, but how it should be done differs. And there's a confusion between the end, or the value of itself, and the existence of moral law. Morality exists independently of how we come to know it. We can show how moral values are discovered, but it would not show that those values were invented. So we have the moral law. Atheists say, though, that we come across it through natural selection. That's how we get our morals laws. But their natural selection, they say, is a good thing. But there can be no good thing unless there's a good moral law. Adolf Hitler used Darwin's theory as justification for the Holocaust. Peter Singer he's one of the founders, if you will, of DNA and all of that. Peter Singer justifies the killing of babies up to 28 days after they're born, just so a mother can decide whether she actually wants it or not. And Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, justified eugenics, or the use of birth control and abortion, to destroy entire cultures and races, using this idea that we have natural selection. That's what creates our moral values. None of these, however, could be condemned without a higher moral law, and therefore a moral lawgiver. What does this have to do with God? Simply this, that a higher moral law suggests a moral lawgiver. And that is why those of us who believe in God do not have enough faith to be an atheist. Those we've looked at today of just these three theories. There are many arguments out there. We had no time today to go over, but the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and the morality argument, they all point to what? They point to a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful God. They point to a personal and intelligent being. They point to a moral being. And if you think of this spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent, moral creator, what does that sound like? It sounds like what we call God, Right? Because of this proofs, we know then that atheism cannot be. We know that pantheism cannot be. We know that polytheism cannot be. All that leaves left then is theism, that there is a theistic God. Again, how do we know which God it is? It could be the Christian God. It might not be. But at this point, what we've determined is that, yes, there is a theistic God, that a theistic God did put all this into motion. And over the next few weeks, we're going to find out that while it's necessary condition but not sufficient, we're going to find out that, yes, there is reason to believe the Old Testament, reason to believe the New Testament, reason to believe that God is the God of the Judeo-Christian source. And that, in fact, what Jesus did, come to earth as a man, that he was tortured and killed and he was buried and he rose again. This is our faith. This is our reliance on reality, and it has scientific evidences to back it up. And we can rely on that in good confidence. Let's go ahead and